These guys would come in and they would never flinch. They would support you. They would knock out. They would keep coming until they didn't have any more ammunition or they were knocked down.
A Cobra attack helicopter pilot in the Vietnam War is remembered by comrades as a brave warrior, a good friend, and a humble hero.
You know, I was talking to my oldest daughter just this weekend about what they're learning about in school. They're not learning about this stuff. They're not getting these stories.
And we're all reminded, veteran and civilian alike, how important these stories and the warriors who lived them are for us to keep close in our national memory. Hello, and welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. Ken Mick flew a Cobra combat helicopter in Vietnam. His exploits in the air and the stories he wrote for the Mighty Pen were riveting and beloved by all the fighting men on the ground to whose rescue Ken and the chopper pilots like him rushed with courage and a lot of firepower. Ken Mick has passed away, so in this podcast, I'll talk with two warriors from different generations, men who knew Ken well. Dan Thompson served in the Special Operations Group during the Vietnam War, and Phil Trezza, a 14-year combat medic during the War on Terror. We'll hear two of Ken's stories of his time in the pilot seat of a Cobra attack helicopter above the jungles and battlegrounds of Vietnam. Let's listen to our first story, New Car Smell, read by Harry Kollatz.
With my co-pilot BJ, I strolled out to the flight line at Tan Me. Reaching our aircraft, I was struck by how different this flight would be. BJ called to me from the back seat. I climbed into the troop compartment of a UH-1 Huey helicopter. As a passenger, I felt no stress. I would fire no rockets, watch no Loach search for enemy troops, nor direct any airstrikes. Today, I would devote my energy to watching the lush terrain unroll beneath our low-flying aircraft. I buckled my seatbelt and plugged my helmet into the commo system, reporting readiness and awaiting the finish of pre-flight checks by Centaur 22, CW2 Avery, and his co-pilot. His crew chief, Sergeant Holt, called, "Clear right." Riding on the left side, BJ called, "Clear left." Tan Me Tower, Centaur 22 ready for departure. 5 on board, en route, Marble Mountain. Centaur 22, no reported traffic. Cleared to hover taxi runway 09er. Depart when ready. Report clear of Phu Bai. CW2 Avery lifted to a hover, moved the Huey to runway 09, and transitioned smoothly into his takeoff procedure. Passing the runway apron, he turned south and settled into a 90-knot cruise at 50-foot altitude for the trip south along the beach. Local villagers waved as we passed and children raced along the sand. The only anticipated danger on this route was the occasional net for a fish trap, raised on posts 10 feet above the water, drying in the heat. BJ and I were getting a day off from flying combat missions, headed to Marble Mountain, the former USMC airfield south of Da Nang. We could relax and enjoy the vista. Our only responsibility commenced when we landed and reported to F Troop Maintenance to pick up our brand new AH-1G Cobra, a 1970 model with less than 50 flight hours recorded in its pristine logbook. It was as close to new as you could get. Its problems, if any, would be discovered by me. It would have no bullet holes, covered with 100-mile-an-hour tape, and the paint would all be factory fresh and of a uniform shade. Exiting the beach, the Huey flew west to intercept QL-1, the main highway below Phu Bai. We flew IFR, I follow road. As we continued south, verdant fields pocked by the gray shapes of ancient French blockhouses emerged. The ugly structures now housed Arvin outposts and ghostly whispers of skirmishes past. Ahead, the road rose as it climbed toward the 1,600-foot elevation by the Hai Van Pass. The highway continued south, threading a course between Green Mountains on the right and the azure expanse of the South China Sea on the left. At the summit, A pair of concrete forts appeared, manned by small units of ARVN soldiers. Children, wives, and farm animals circulated within the enclosures, waving and clapping as we passed low overhead. On the south side of the crest, the road fell away steeply toward another world with the modern city of Da Nang in the far distance. As the terrain leveled, we returned to the beach. Spectacular views continued to emerge. Near Da Nang Air Force Base, Centaur 22 called, Da Nang Tower, Centaur 22, single UH-1 transiting beach route, destination Marble Mountain. Centaur aircraft, Da Nang Tower, you are cleared beach route southbound. Remain below 100 feet. Fast movers on approach to runway 27. Call clear south and contact Marble Mountain Tower on published frequency. Acknowledging tower, we continued south at a 50-foot altitude. The approach end of runway 27 came into view at 2 o'clock, simultaneously displaying the twin exhausts of an Air Force F-4 Phantom fighter jet passing close above our craft with gear lowered and visible vortices of mists streaming from each wingtip. The Huey rocked violently as we transited the turbulent airflow. Overflying the glorious expanse of China Beach, CW-2 Avery called Marble Mountain and received clearance for a straight-in approach to the maintenance helipad. Centaur maintenance, Centaur 22 approaching helipad. Ground guide in sight. 22 maintenance, truck on way to pick up your cargo and passengers. After a flight of 100 kilometers, we landed in a peaceful environment. Not once had we been fired upon during our flight. Life looked different from this side of the looking glass. Parked on the ramp at Tan Me, the new helicopter looked as though it had just emerged from the showroom floor onto the parking lot. The freshly painted shark's teeth and the Centaur insignia on the doghouse alongside the main rotor mast provided the menacing appearance befitting a killing machine. The flight back north in QL-1 had been a joy and proved incident-free. Passing over the High Van Pass with its prominent yellow and red-striped RVN flag, its waving excited children and peaceful soldiers gave lie to the war progressing a few miles away. Tanmi Tower, Centaur 49 of beam Phu Bai, request landing. Centaur 49, Tanmi, you are cleared on beach route, landing runway 27, call final. Sergeant Max, the gun platoon NCO, met us at our parking spot along with Specialist Smith, my crew chief. Both were eager to check out the new ship. As I climbed out of my compartment, I held aloft a small, green, cardboard, pine-scented car freshener given to me by the maintenance sergeant at Marble Mountain. It had hung from the gun sight on our northern flight and imparted a bit of stateside aroma to the occasion. Smiles and thumbs up greeted the memento. I signed off the log entries and noted no deficiencies, an unusual entry. I passed the book to Specialist Smith, who began his daily inspection. Max waited to take us to ops for a debrief. Captain Graff, the operations officer, met our arriving jeep. Glad to see you back. Are you up? Aircraft is being fueled, armed, and ready, sir. Okay. Your team lead on tomorrow's mid-morning mission. I'll have details for you at 1900. I'm giving you a routine VR for your new Cobra's first mission. Our flight consisted of 2 OH-6 Loaches, Centaurs 21 and 26, 2 AH-1 Cobras, 49 and 45, and a UH-1 Huey, Centaur 32. The team's first task would be a bomb damage assessment for a B-52 arc light bombing off the area between the FSB Bastogne and the Au Chat Valley. We would orbit between FSB Birmingham and FSB Bastogne. The mission would be accomplished by a flight of 3 B-52s, flying above effective missile altitude with contrails barely visible from ground level. The lead aircraft would drop its bombs in a line, followed by the second and third planes. When all bombs had impacted the target area, our 2 Loaches would overfly the bomb site and report on its effectiveness. Our Cobras would protect the scouts and engage any bad guys. I awaited the bomber contact with excitement. Seeing the awesome destructive power of the B-52 trio provided a singular visual and auditory event. Centaur 49, bombard, 2 mics out. We'll call drop. We continued to orbit, then Centaur, bombard, drop. Our flight view remained riveted on the jungle target to the west. Massive explosions erupted across the designated area, marching south in a continuous ripple of mayhem. Trees, earth, and fortifications rocketed hundreds of feet into the air. Sound followed sight and rumbled past us. I imagined a breaking wave lifting our flight's boats as it headed east. A second load of bombs and a third impacted. The western area had become a solid wall rising out of the verdant hell. Centaur flight, bombard clear. It's all yours now. Bombard Centaur 49, roger. We'll pass results when able. Centaur flight 21 and 26 cleared in. Work north to south, one pass only. 49, 21, roger. North to south, one pass. The two Loaches sprinted ahead. Centaur 21, the leader, called, "Numerous old bunkers, no visible troops." Centaur 26 followed, searching and ready to support 21. Nearing halfway down the churn strike area, the Loaches still had no contact. 49, 21 now seeing soldiers. So far they're dazed and confused. Bunkers now recent. My Cobra fire team remained outside the bombed area, keeping the Loaches in sight. BDA often produced nothing except hundreds of feet of destroyed vegetation. However, the situation could quickly escalate. Dazed and confused enemy troops rapidly awakened. 21 taking fire. The Loach began to evade in a zigzag pattern. Centaur 26, his wingman, poured minigun fire in 21's wake. 21 and 26, 49 inbound. The Loaches fled to the southeast, and I began to rain 40-millimeter grenades and minigun fire onto the smoke rising from a marker dropped by the scouts. Like ants emerging from a broken hive, the NVA troops swarmed. My gunfire mowed them down in waves. Centaur 45 followed me with rockets as I broke east. I continued around to make another pass. Whang! A sledgehammer noise shook the aircraft. I quickly turned away to scan the instrument panel for flashing warnings. No indicators caught my eye. Centaur 49, 45, guess you broke your cherry. I was furious at the damage to my new aircraft. The maintenance officer's gonna be pissed, I said to BJ. Maybe he won't notice. Right. A new hole in the pristine paint of the only new aircraft in the unit. As though he could hear us, Centaur Ops called, 49 Center 3, do you have enough fuel and ammo for a quick VR on your way home? 3, this is 49. We can cover a quick look as long as it's not further west. 49-3, contact FSB Birmingham on the Fox Mike push. He wants you to check out the area where the M41 tank was destroyed near Bastogne. Covey FAC on call if you find anything. Centaur Flight 49, we've been tasked with a quick recon of the area near the road southeast of Bastogne. Looking for signs of other captured tanks or tracked vehicles. Covey FAC on call. Check in with fuel and ammo. Anyone with a problem? When all aircraft reported their ready status, we proceeded east, staying south of the regional route. South of FSB Bastogne, the Loaches spring ahead. 49-21, destroyed tank in sight. Fire turret rusty red and turret lying beside the road. 21-49, we're doing a short op here. Check area south of road and let's go home. With both Cobras covering, the Loaches continued their reconnaissance. 49-21, have sight of tracked vehicles heading southeast. 21-49, any new tracks? Don't go too far into the boonies. 49-21, fresh tracks, smoke deployed. Heading left, can you give me a few rockets for a recon by fire? Roger, 21, 49, and 45 engaging. We each fired 2 pair of 17-pound rockets into the marked area and broke left. Centaur 45's rockets produced explosions and a secondary. 49-45 suggest another run, then home. 45 and 21-49 making final run. Fire belched from what appeared to be a haystack. I poured rockets into the position. More fire erupted from now evident infantry. Green tracers denoting a heavy AA machine gun whizzed by our attacking aircraft. Centaur 45 continued to add his rounds to mine. Centaur 32, 49, I called to Huey. Contact Covey and get us some TAC air support, taking heavy fire. My Cobra lurched sickeningly as renewed hammered blows pounded our tail boom. Every part of my anatomy clenched. I felt as though I was sucking the seat into my rear end. The new Cobra began to wallow sluggishly. 45, 49M jettisoning rocket pods have marginal control, stability control light flashing. Explosive bolts burst on our rocket pods, and the remaining projectiles tumbled away from the wing stores on each side of the fuselage, relieving our damaged craft of considerable weight and increasing our lift away from the 51 caliber anti-aircraft guns. I gasped. I had been holding my breath. My front seat continued to pump round after round into the source of the attack. I strong-armed the cyclic, turning us away from the ambush. More rounds impacted, and we began to chop trees and bamboo in our escape. Centaur 49, Centaur 32, Covey has pair of VNAF A1Es inbound, clear target area when able. Centaur 32, 45, call by wingman, 49 is busy now, has damage. 45, 32, roger that. We'll ask Covey to place a white phosphorus rocket on the target area. Are you clear? 32, 45 clear. 49 has partial control loss, jettisoned pod, and is heading for Tan Me. Am escorting. I struggled east in the damaged Cobra. Unable to transmit, I listened as 45 took over commo. With FSB Birmingham in sight, I trusted my team to escort me home. 45 called Tan Me Tower and briefed them on my damage and requested a straight-in running landing. BJ, follow me through on controls when we line up for running landing, I called blindly on intercom. I saw him raise his arm and wave his acquiescence. I breathed again, glad he was okay. As we passed Fubai, Centaur 45 called 49, Tan Me Tower, cleared you straight into runway 09, flash position lights if you heard me. I flipped them on, then off. BJ, wave if you heard 45's call. No wave. We're cleared straight on runway 09. A wave acknowledged my message. Okay, I will have one pass at this. Lock harness on final. Fuel off when skids touch runway. Another wave. BJ, turn the environmental control unit off. The ECU, a type of air conditioner servicing our enclosed cockpit, stole air from the engine bleed band, thus reducing available power. Suffering some extra heat for a few minutes was prudent. I could see the Perfume River and the huge Air Force long-range radio tower ahead and knew we were nearly home. Crossing the shallow bay, I slowly descended using precise movements of the controls. The aircraft continued to wobble. As we cleared the runway numbers, I eased the collective down, corrected for a slight yaw, and felt the back left skid touch. I firmly planted the ship on the PSP surface. We skidded and tipped right before rocking back left, slamming down with a metallic scream from the aircraft. The recently new Cobra lurched to a stop. Main fuel off, battery off. Silence signaled our arrival. We threw both canopies open, waited for the rotors to stop, then scrambled out and moved away from the trembling beast. Fire trucks and an ambulance roared up to the tableau. Anybody hurt? A medic called. I'm okay. BJ? He waved again and grinning said, Can you hear me now? Maintenance vehicles and a Jeep carrying the CO and maintenance officer followed. I joined them, surveying the damage. We walked around the wounded bird. I counted 17 separate holes. Most were in the tail boom, but several had penetrated critical areas, including hydraulic and oil lines and assorted electrical components. The main rotor blade showed 3 large gaps. They looked like shark bites. The CO and maintenance officer huddled. Their demeanor confirmed their negative conclusions. The new Cobra required a major rebuild. The damage was far more extensive than unit maintenance could handle. The MO took the logbook and firmly placed a red X on the page. Grounded, the Cobra sulked, awaiting a CH-47 Chinook sling out to Da Nang. I gathered my gear from the cockpit. As I began to leave, I paused and climbed back to lean into the rear seat compartment. I reached for the small green pine tree hanging from the compass knob and placed it in my pocket. The ephemeral new car smell had forever dissipated, replaced by the acrid odors of fear, JP4, and scorched metal.
I'm joined by Dan Thompson and Phil Trezza. Dan, 4 years active duty and served in Vietnam. Phil, 5 years active duty as a Army medic, served in the War on Terror. The author of that lovely piece, New Car Smell, Ken Mick, has passed away. And I've invited these two gentlemen in to talk about Ken, talk about his war with you, Dan, and how important warriors are with you, Phil. Dan, I'd like to start with you. You were an admirer of Ken's writing as well as the man, as were we all. but I'd like to start with you. Talk about, first of all, the man you knew, Ken Mick, and then we'll talk about this piece, and then we'll talk about war.
I can talk about what he did, and I can talk about his effect on me in his stories and his presence in the MPP writers group. I could see each and every place that he described as he flew from Fubai to Da Nang. My FOB was approximately a half a mile from the Marine Air Force Base where he landed and picked up that chopper. So it was very vivid to me. It was very real. He is a spectacular writer, and he can portray the scene so well. And as we know, the scene can be a character in itself. And in this case, it was.
Yeah. And gentlemen, we all knew Ken. Phil, he was one of those unassuming warriors, right? This guy flew a Cobra into combat. His stories can be harrowing. Yet to know Ken, he's just a affable uncle kind of Ken guy. I mean, you wouldn't peg him for a warrior. You wouldn't peg him for this guy.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think a lot of the folks that I've come across and got to meet and know in the Mighty Pen Project are like that. Because, a lot of regular people are kind of thrown into very irregular situations. I've never been on a Cobra. That's beyond my experience in the military. I'd like to be on the ground, not in the water, not in the air, on the ground. This group of people listening to these stories is, to me, even more fun than writing the stories. I like to be around and listen to the generation before me, or sometimes two generations before me, about things that I couldn't even imagine, coming from just unassuming people, folks that you'll see in the food line or something like that, and you won't even know some of the things that they have in their past. So it's just it's an honor and a pleasure to be around those people and to be able to hear these stories.
Dan, there's a Ken Mick story, the first one he ever wrote for us. In the middle of dodging anti-aircraft fire, he writes, "My cockpit flew off," the cockpit cover.
Yes.
And then he goes on to describe other things. And then I did this and I did that. You remember? And I said,
Yes.
Wait, Ken, at 200 knots, at 1,500 feet, dodging anti-aircraft fire, your aircraft's, the cockpit cover flew off. At that moment, Ken, I think you should pause in the story and describe that. Remember, but he was so nonplussed, so affable. Yeah. He's just like, well, in the middle of doing all these other things.
As you said, he's very unassuming. There's a picture of him in one of his stories. I think it's this one where he's posed in front of the Cobra. And I mean, he looks like John Wayne. I mean, he's just nonchalant. He's standing there big as life. But at the same time, he's humbled, and it's no braggadocio in him, not in his bones. He's just a matter of fact. He underplays in his stories what he does. He keeps it very calm, but the impact of the scenes that he describes are just powerful.
Phil, generations of warriors have preceded you. Sadly, I think that they will continue beyond all of us. What's it like getting to know and care about these men and women who are part of the Mighty Pen? And Ken passed away, and he's not the only one, and he won't be the last. But you'll be here a long time. What is it like being a warrior and then getting to know these men, getting to know their stories, and knowing Ken and several others just aren't here anymore?
It's sad. Obviously, it's sad, but I'm just glad to be able to have the time with these folks and be able to learn about their lives. As Dan said, the writing is beautiful too. I mean, whether we're around the table working on, pieces of writing, or we're, on the back porch just shooting the breeze. I was talking to my oldest daughter just this weekend about what they're learning about in school. They're not learning about this stuff. They're not getting these stories. And this is important. And I think that's why the Mighty Pen is so important. We're capturing very important pieces of our own history. And I'm glad that we were able to do it. And I'm glad that we're continuing to do it so that folks, hopefully, for many years from now, will be able to enjoy them and to understand them.
So we're going to listen to one more story by Ken Mick, Scramble. Then you two gentlemen will stay and we'll talk some more about that. But before we get there, I'd like to give one of my private anecdotes about Ken Mick. And it was at his funeral service.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan, you were there.
Yeah.
It was lovely. Ken was, 75 people were there, family, people that knew him. And there was about 10 of us from the Mighty Pen there.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we almost felt like they didn't know Ken, that you who had served miles away from where he served, and all these other men and women that were there, it was almost like the people that had grown up with Ken talked about him as a young boy and a young man and a father, a brother. But a lot of you guys were like, well, they didn't really know the Ken that we knew. And I was so struck by that, sitting amongst you warriors, you fellow warriors, that you guys were murmuring like, no, that wasn't Ken. That was that guy's brother, maybe that young man's father. But Ken was that John Wayne dude standing next to the Cobra, right?
Right.
Now our second story, Scramble, also performed by Harry Kollatz. Then I'll talk more about author Ken Mick with Dan Thompson and Phil Trezza.
The early light oozed through the mist, creating a natural sauna as dawn replaced night in Lai Khe, Republic of Vietnam. I pictured the cool mornings of Ohio with their waking birdsong as I rushed to class, carrying a few books and tablets across the leafy college green at OU in Athens and admiring the many-skirted co-eds contrasted harshly with the reality of a muggy day in Southeast Asia. The soupy fog heralded another hot, humidity-saturated day. Soon, military convoys passing on Highway 13, the main road from Saigon to Loc Ninh, would add their diesel stench and powdery dust to the uncomfortable surroundings, giving my flight suit an embellishment of rusty talc. At 0630, my two-piece Nomex flight suit had already sweated through. Its fire-retardant cloth did not allow for much ventilation and rapidly became a wet blanket. The sweatband in my black Stetson cav hat chafed. On my way back to the flight line, I carried my SPH-4 flight helmet in its olive green bag and wore the Kevlar chicken plate armor draped about my shoulders. I carried a Car-15 rifle, a .556 caliber collapsible stock version of the trusty M16 infantry weapon, and a bandolier of spare magazines of ammunition. I also wore a black shoulder holster with a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver. My excrement-colored flight suit sported an amazing variety of pockets and nooks to store grease pencils, maps, sunglasses, knives, and the odd candy bar. Atop all this gear rode a survival vest with even more pockets. Varied pouches held a compass, knife, signal operating instruction, a book about the size of a paperback Webster dictionary, strobe light, and emergency survival radio. Trudging to my assigned AH-1G Cobra gunship, I looked similar to most others, headed in the same direction. Our swarm resembled a small herd of pack mules ambling along behind an old West Conestoga wagon. I remembered my father, an Air Force pilot heading off to fly, mounted in an air-conditioned blue Air Force van, followed by a file of bearers carrying his gear. Why did I choose the Army over a plush Air Force life? Perhaps the glib Army aviation recruiter who told me that I would become a pilot faster in the Army and that helicopters were cool, which bombers clearly were not. However, the real reason involved doing something similar to my father, but not exactly the same. Thus, I chose the Army, living in tents and carrying my stuff like a real man, not like those valet-loving Air Force pukes. My reverie ended with a loud whoomp nearby, producing a cloud of dust and debris. A siren began to wail. The herd became a stampede, rushing to our mounts to repel this attack. Reaching my aircraft, the crew chief and I hurriedly untied the blades, removed the safeties, and stored my gear. I climbed into the backseat aircraft commander position and began a truncated pre-flight check. Meanwhile, my front seat co-pilot gunner appeared and climbed into his cramped compartment. I hit the battery switch, engaged the fuel switches, and squeezed the trigger, beginning the start sequence. The process completed and radios on, I called operations. Centaur Ops, Centaur 49, what's going on? 49 Ops, depart north when cleared and join the other guns. Contact 5-6 on unit push. Switching radios, I called Like K Tower for clearance and joined the other Cobras gathering beside the runway. As we were cleared, I pulled pitch and headed north to exit the base. After crossing the wire, I told Jimbo, my co-pilot, to get clearance from Province Artillery and to go weapons hot. I called our platoon leader. 5-6, this is 4-9. Roger, 4-9. 5-6, orbit base clockwise and await orders. No enemy info yet. Adrenaline pumping through our bodies as our flight flew circles around the airfield and longed for some action. After a slow 10 to 15 minutes, the call came to stand down. False alarm. Centaur flight, return to base, meet at ops for debrief. Only a sigh signaled our disappointment. Keyed up and aroused, but still carrying a full weapons load, we landed. We gathered in ops, and Captain Graff, the operations officer, gave us the word. No enemy, just a pilot checking a Cobra and accidentally firing a 40-millimeter grenade into the L-shaped revetment wall. Thankfully, the explosion we heard was the propellant shooting the shell out of the M129 turret. The round had not accelerated far enough to arm the explosive warhead. Nobody hurt except for one cowed aviator. Graff proceeded to flog us with a lecture on armament safety. He mentioned a mandatory class, which sounded very un-Warzone. After returning to the aircraft and refueling, I left my front seat to finish the post-flight inspection and trotted down the flight line to a knot of aviators at the nearby revetment. What's going on? Anybody hurt? Snake damage? No at all. It was a fuck-up and not incoming. Nobody hurt. I slowed down and worked my way into the group around the accident scene. I saw the pilot, Lieutenant Silver, sitting on an open ammo bay door, holding his head down and retching. Not hurt. I began walking uphill from the flight line toward the hooch area, already planning a visit to the O Club for a cold black label and a shot. LT, where you going? Called Captain Double D, my platoon leader. Double D was short for Delbart Dumpy, a mark of our respect for his leadership and flying abilities. My mission is scratched. I'm headed to the club. Afraid not. You're up in an hour going to Coochie with a team to support the Arvins. Your new front seat is at the 20-ship pre-flighting now. Get your brief from ops and 10 mics. I groaned. Not only would I have to go up again, but I had one of the 20-millimeter Cobras and a new co-pilot. On my last 20-millimeter mission, the vibration from firing the huge 6-barreled Gatling gun had caused one of the power feeds to the instrument panel to pop out, rendering most of the dials and gauges worthless. The 20 ships were notorious for freaky behavior. The M35 gun and ammunition added up to 1,200 pounds to the aircraft weight when loaded with its 950-round ammo load. The blast from the gun, while firing, beat on the left side of the aircraft and required an additional slab of armor to help absorb the shock and keep it from seriously damaging the ship and crew. The gun did, however, have a couple of advantages. First, it gave the aircrew the ability to stand off from the target and fire with pinpoint accuracy, unlike firing rockets, which needed to allow for a drop at the end of their flight. Additionally, firing the cannon produced an awe-inspiring sound like operating the Texas chainsaw on steroids. Who's my front seater? W.O. Baggins, he smirked. New guy. They call him Groceries. After a sketchy brief by ops, I headed to the aircraft to meet my new crew member and gunship. Both proved to be somewhat impressive. The 6-barreled gun mounted under the left wing looked seriously wicked. Sadly, Groceries' appearance did not resonate like that of the gun. W.O. Baggins, whose physique explained his nickname, seemed bright enough. He expressed his familiarity with flying in a 20 ship. Where his experience had been gained, I neither questioned nor learned, as time was short, and I was more concerned about his ability to fit into the front compartment. The mission was seemingly simple. Fly to Coochie, some 25 clicks from Lai K, meet with a U.S. advisor and his Arvin counterpart, locate and eliminate a VC blocking unit, and destroy their bunkers. All requirements sounded like they fit well with our armament and capabilities. Our OH-6 Loach pilot, W.O. Boomer, and I agreed on an action plan whereby he would confirm the bad guy location and drop smoke on them. I would then soak their position with a fire hose stream of 20-millimeter rounds. Boomer took off first, and I followed, climbing to around 1,500 feet altitude. The OH-6 called his break into the visual recon area agreed upon. 4-9, 13 entering box. Roger 13, you're cleared in hot. I circled over the friendlies with Boomer clearly in sight. 4-9, 13 bunkers in view and manned. Smoke away. I called the advisor on his Fox mic radio frequency. Keeper 8, Centaur 4-9, Loach has spotted enemy and marked their location. Am I clear to engage? Roger 4-9, this is Keeper 8. Your smoke is right on. You are cleared to engage. As I began to fire into the tree line, the bad guys fired at both aircraft, but my cannon fire continued to walk through their position, setting small fires and causing some secondaries. 4-9, this is Keeper 8. Cease fire. You're hitting the friendlies. Keeper 8, Centaur 4-9. Roger, cease fire, but it's not so. My rounds are clearly in sight, as are the friendly positions. 4-9, Keeper 8, I say again, cease fire and meet me at the Coochie airstrip. I quickly flew to the airstrip, landed, and shut down. I could see Keeper 8 and a very agitated Arvin officer waiting for Boomer and me. My pucker factor was sky high, and I screwed up. It seemed that I had miscalculated one item in my hasty 20-millimeter mission planning. The 20-millimeter rounds looked like very large rifle bullets, and after firing, eject the spent cartridges from a chute on the underside of the Cobra. Large, empty, hot shell casings weighing several ounces each were being dumped over the friendlies, causing excitement and some discomfort. My apology was grudgingly accepted. We finished the mission from an alternate standoff position over an unmanned piece of terrain. Another note to add to my lessons learned log about operation of a 20-millimeter ship. After our release from the Coochie mission, we headed north toward Lai K base. 4-9, 13, called Boomer from his Loach. How about taking a look at the old rubber plant along the Saigon River? It's just off our flight path, and I've seen activity there in the past. 13, 4-9, wait one while I clear us with Ops. Ops rapidly approved our detour and confirmed that no friendlies were in our AO, but that we could only fire if fired upon. I relayed the orders to 13, and we proceeded over the abandoned processing site. 13-4-9, you're cleared down when ready. 13 spiraled down into an area which appeared deserted. The old plant appeared to be constructed of something like concrete block and had once shone with white paint. Its red tile roof was partially collapsed. You could see into what remained of a concrete floor through the gaps. As he executed his recon, 13 reported the usual old fighting positions and bunkers, but nothing new. 13-4-9, let's head home. This area looks barren. 4-9, 13, one more pass, and I'm out. I saw recent motorbike tracks on the trail we passed. Roger 13, be careful. A double click on the radio from the Loach signaled his concurrence. Taking fire, came Boomer's excited call. Smoke's out. Enemy is 2 guys with AKs on a motorcycle. They fired on us. I'm clear. A dusty cloud signaled the motorcycle's direction. Had they remained in the trees, we might not have seen them. Grocers, you're clear to fire the minigun at the fleeing vehicle. He engaged, but his long burst went wide of the target and abruptly stopped. I assumed he had a break in the minigun drive cable which fed the belted ammo. Cable breaks happened periodically, and Supply had a hard time getting new ones as replacements, so maintenance made do with fixing the old ones. Hold on, Groceries. I'm going with the 20-millimeter, I said over the intercom. I rolled the Cobra into a steep dive and placed the sights on the fleeing motorbike. As my airspeed climbed, I squeezed the trigger to produce a stream of heavy shells chasing the enemy. While the cannon blasted, the front canopy abruptly vibrated open, thrusting out like a sail into the wind. The aircraft rolled right, pitching us over 90 degrees onto our side. Maps and other loose items in the front compartment began swirling madly around the cockpit. Thankfully, my training kicked in, overriding the chemicals flooding my system. First, I nervously eased our dive, rolled back to the left, and leveled the wings. Next, I began a cyclic climb to avoid the trees and terrain ahead. Then I bellowed on the intercom, "Close your canopy, groceries, close your canopy!" 4-9, 13 were clear, but what happened? 13, 4-9, our canopy popped open. Almost lost it. Many also went up. Let's head home. Roger, 4-9. Motorcycle guys headed back into the trees. I am back up with you and don't see any obvious damage to your snake. We were soon cleared to land at our base. I parked the 20mm ship near the maintenance hangar. I wrote up the damage in the logbook and wearily climbed down from my cockpit. "Groceries? I thought you had 20mm cannon experience. Your dumbass reaction almost got us killed, motherfucker." He mumbled a reply about seeing a training film and fled uphill toward ops. Obviously, he missed the part about placing his arm on the canopy latch lever when firing a 20mm in a steep dive. I headed to ops to debrief, then to my hooch to dump my gear. Later, in the club, my platoon leader, Double D, soberly told me that the canopy opening incident had convinced Groceries that he was not cut out to be a Cobra pilot. He left the unit soon thereafter. I didn't fly the 20mm ship on a mission for the remainder of my tour, nor, thankfully, did I ever encounter Groceries again.
I'm back with Dan Thompson, Phil Trezza. I want to talk with you both about the role of the helicopter in not only Vietnam, but of course Iraq and Afghanistan. And without question, Ken Mick was an eloquent bard of his role as a helicopter pilot. I mean, even down to the radio chatter. I mean, I found myself enthralled and in the cockpit with him because of the explanations and the descriptions and the conciseness and the thump. And so, Dan, start with you, since Ken flew the Cobra in your conflict in Vietnam. But as a dude on the ground, what did it mean to you? And Phil, I'm going to ask you the same question. What did it mean to you to have Ken Mick covering your ass in a Cobra like that?
Well, we were inserted into places where we shouldn't be. We were in Laos. We were not supposed to be there. And pilots like Ken, and Ken did support my mission. Having those guys fly in with you to cover you on insertion, because that's the primary time when you can get hit very easily and get wiped out. If they're not there, if they don't respond, you're gone. The most important time was on extraction. And normally we were surrounded, but not only by 51 caliber machine guns, but also by 37s and 57s. Now, when Cobras are going against them, it's a real trick, because they really have access to be able to knock you down. And these guys would come in and they would never flinch. They would come in, they would support you, they would knock out, they would keep coming until they didn't have any more ammunition, or they were knocked down, or they were out of fuel. Those are the only conditions they'd leave. And so to see those guys roll in when you need somebody hit that's less than 50 yards away from you, that's closing on you, is a wonderful experience. And that's why I love Ken so much.
I was going to say it was palpable whenever you guys were in class together and on the back porch of my house together that you loved Ken for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Phil, a more contemporary war in Iraq, you were a medic and you had to rely on choppers, not only occasionally for dust off evacs, but also for support in the field. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Ken lays out the special relationship that you have with a vehicle, right? So like for my experience, I was on something called a Striker, and it's a ground vehicle, has wheels, 8 wheels. But he speaks about his helicopter the way that I know that myself and my friends felt about our vehicle. That was our home. That was where we ate. That was our safety. And then when we're outside of that vehicle, dismounted, there's a special feeling that you have when you're on the ground in a scary city. And if you're taking fire, it's hard to know, is that sound an echo, where the gunfire is coming from, and trying to figure out things on the ground, and then seeing, an Apache up in the sky, or seeing some aerial assets that have you covered. It feels a whole lot better knowing that they're up there with some eyes and with some weapons, trying to find the same bad guys that you're trying to find. I think he does a great job. And I didn't know a whole lot about Cobras.
You both spent some time in combat, dangerous situations. You ever have a groceries, Dan?
A couple.
No names.
No names.
Tell me about one.
So I was a platoon leader for a hatchet force, and we were having trouble keeping commanders. There was a rotation going on. For some reason, we were shorthanded everywhere. So we were without a company commander for about a month, and I stood in, and they decided they needed a company commander, and they pulled a major from the motor pool, and he would look like groceries. So on our first physical, we were out training, and he decided to show up, and we would do full backpack, 2 to 5 miles around the circle to keep our legs and back in shape. And I think he made it to the top of the hill on the first go around, and then we didn't see him again. And about 2 weeks later, he was back in the motor pool. So that was one of my groceries.
And thank goodness that happened not in the bush.
Yeah, this would have not gone well.
Yeah. Phil, similar?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us were knuckleheads. So, mistakes may have been made. But even for a lot of us knuckleheads, I think sometimes when the you-know-what hit the fan, somehow we all kind of rose to the occasion for the most part, even the folks that you wouldn't really expect. We did have one platoon sergeant when we first got to Iraq, and he was questionable on some of his decisions that he was making. And we had a really difficult winter in 2006, and they were blowing the crap out of our vehicles, to put it eloquently. And I think that had a pretty, it was very impactful on our platoon sergeant, and he ended up, I think he went the groceries route and said, "This might not be for me."
Might not be for me.
and was quickly replaced.
Both you gentlemen, thank you for coming in today to talk about Ken, about your own experience in combat and your wisdom and your knowledge about helicopters. Phil, you have been a good friend to veterans. You worked in the Veterans Administration in the state of Virginia for a long time. Dan, I know you're a member of several veterans organizations.
Yes.
You guys have continued to serve with honor outside of uniform as well as in. And I know you both to be wonderful men, honorable warriors. And speaking for the Mighty Pen, we have enjoyed having you both there and collecting your stories, and we're going to do more. Thank you so much for coming in today. Phil.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America, and you want to learn how to best tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's pieces and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Original music for this episode provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, If you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen Podcast. It's an honor.